You can see the world the way it really is. Always.
Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It is holiday time around here and I'm back in the shop to do my next project, which has taken me a while to get to. Sorry, Mom. But we're gonna be working on building a contemporary TV stand for my mom. Don't tell anyone, shh. So I've actually kind of laid everything out the way I want it. I'm gonna incorporate a little bit of metal into this build. It's not gonna have any welding, unfortunately, but there is gonna be a little bit of metal as I've kind of designed it up in my head and up on the whiteboard. I will have this actual plan on the new Built by Bailey's website once I finally get that done, but that link will be in the description once it goes live. So you guys can go ahead and click on that and you'll have all the dimensions in that plan to go ahead and build it your own way. I've got a lot of sheet goods and all kinds of stuff I gotta start cutting and ripping down. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on ripping the sheet goods down first. You guys don't need to see me do that. Ripping them down to the stock that I need, and then we're gonna go ahead and start laying this thing out and assemble it. Should be a fun project. I'm hoping that my mom will like it, but she definitely needs a new TV stand. So happy holidays everybody, and thanks for watching, and let's get started. Alright, so I've cut all of my stock for the horizontal shelf and stand portion of the contemporary TV stand that we're making. Now we're going to do a little bit of math to figure out our side panels that are going to go in between those shelf layers in order to assemble our entire project and have everything cut just right. So, to start with, we have a total of 28 inches of height from ground to the top of this TV stand, okay? That's our total height. I have chrome legs that I'm going to be installing onto this TV stand, and those chrome legs are 4 7/8 inches high, okay? That's outside dimension, bottom to top, okay? 4 7/8 inches. So, our total height is 28. We've got legs that are 4 7/8. That leaves me 23 1/8 of outside dimension that I have to use to get to that total height. Okay, I'm gonna have 3 horizontal pieces that assemble this contemporary TV stand. So I'm gonna have end panels that are gonna go in between, because I have cut those horizontal pieces full length, okay? So my end panel will go in like this, in between the horizontal piece, all right? This stock is 1/2 inch thick, and I have a total, without the legs, of 23 1/8 inches outside to outside of total height left, okay? Now, if I have 3 of these horizontal shelf pieces going in, I've got a total in between of 1/2 inch plus 1/2 inch for the first piece, and then the second piece, so I have my middle, I got a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch, okay? So I've taken an inch off of each one of those pieces, so now I have 21 1/8 inches that I have left spanning in between my shelves. Gotta divide that in half, so 21 1/8 inches divided by 2 is 10 9/16 inches. That's going to be the actual dimension, the actual cut length, stock length of our side panels. Each panel, and we're going to have 4 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, is going to be 10 9/16 inches. Hopefully you followed along as I did that. And I'm going to go ahead and cut those pieces next, and then we're going to start the assembly of the box itself. Okay, so now I'm down in the assembly center and I'm going to actually lay out all my stock and start making my tick marks so I can line up for my biscuit joiner. So what I'm actually talking about is I'm going to take my end panels, lay them against my face pieces for the shelving and the actual frame of the box. I'm going to line them up so they're flush with the outside, but not necessarily need to be completely flush yet, because the biscuit joiner will take care of that. And then I'm going to make tick marks, so little marks on the edge of this board and the edge of this board, so I have a reference point of where to stick my biscuit joiner to make my cuts. Okay? So all I'm doing is just laying these boards out. So these two edges are the most important to be flush, this side and that side. This doesn't have to be flush yet because we're going to cut the biscuits at the same depth on each board. We're going to cut the same depth here and here. So all I'm doing is lining up my flush ends, making sure I'm flush here, and then I'm just going to do 2 biscuits for each one of these. Actually, we're going to go 3 because I have enough width. Okay? And I make the ticks there, there, there. Okay? So if you can see, these tick marks, these little marks here, are lined up with the same ones on this board. And that way I can reference where to cut them. Okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the boards and I'm going to mark all my ends, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut them, run my biscuit through here, and then I'm going to glue up the biscuits next. All right, so let's talk about biscuit joiners for a minute and what they actually are, what they're useful for. There's a lot of thought out there on if they're even useful at all for joinery in particular. And the first thing you have to remember with a biscuit joint itself, it's not the strongest joint in the world. And the reason I say that is because you're basically cutting slots into the wood itself. And then you're going to use what's actually a biscuit, which is a piece of material that you can actually buy at lots of places, including Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, that actually gets inserted into this slot. Okay, so after you've run your biscuit, and I'll show you really quick how you set up the biscuit joiner and how you use it, especially on we're not doing plane to plane. We're actually running vertical, obviously, end panels for the TV stand we're doing. So this is a biscuit right here. That biscuit gets glued and set into that joint, okay? And then I'm making 3 of these for each panel, and then that goes into the joint I make on the other stock, and it's glued down and set in there. And I actually glue the bottom of these too. Now, it's not strong because you can see it's just a piece of material. I mean, it's going to hold everything in place, and it's nice for locking it into the flush edge of the material. But overall, it's not going to be the strongest because it's not being held together by screws, nails, or whatever. Glue is a great bonding agent if you're using the right kind of glue. But as far as joinery joints go, this is not the strongest joint there is. That being said, with this actual furniture piece that I'm making, this TV stand, I'm doing this to square everything up the way I want it with the biscuit joints and hold it in place. And then I'm actually going to have little 90-degree L angles that go into the furniture that are actually going to hold it in place as far as structure goes for weight and movement and all the stuff that happens with furniture. So these joints are usually, I make them for putting end stocks together, so making, putting pieces together to make a longer tabletop or whatever. For box joints, so we're doing, horizontal to vertical application that's being tied together. I don't say this is the only thing you should use most of the time. Sometimes I've even done that and then set some finish nails on the end. The problem with going with joinery on the ends here is that this stuff in particular, because it's actually laminated together, can split. So you have to be careful with using a biscuit joint as your only method of adhering 2 pieces of stock together. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about the biscuit joiner itself. All right, so here's a biscuit joiner itself. This is actually a pretty simple tool to use. It's got a lot of room for error. So for like the DIY projects and the beginning woodworking that people are getting into, It's actually a pretty easy tool to use and to set up. First things first, the way it cuts the joint itself is it's actually a plunging tool. So what that means is when you pull the trigger, you let it speed up, and then there's actually springs back here that when you push against the material, you actually plunge it in there, and you can see that blade now comes out, right? So that blade sticks out, and when the machine is running, that blade is spinning horizontally this way, and it just basically burrows that joint in, and then you release it, you come out, let go of the trigger, and you've got your biscuit joint, okay? That's kind of how the machine works itself, the tool works itself. Now, every biscuit joiner has what's a guard as well, okay? And this guard can come down to lots of different angles in between to help you level the tool itself out. We're gonna lock it at 90 degrees, and then you have to set up the tool itself to get the middle of the stock lined up for every one of your joints. What I mean by that, we're using 1/2 inch material for this particular project. There's some examples here. So what I do is you take the material, you set it flat on the ground, okay? Then you set the machine itself, the tool itself up, flush with your surface that you're setting the stock on. And then there's adjustments, this one in particular has adjustments on this side, to lower this guard so it's flush with the top of this material, and that will help line up that biscuit blade, okay? So I loosen this thing up, and then I set it down, flush against the stock, okay? And then what I do is, and I'll flip it around so you can see it this way. It's flush against the stock here, okay? Get the cord out of the way. And then there's a gap here, so what I need to do is I need to take this wheel adjustment and I raise it down until that's now tight to the top of the material, okay? When I've got it nice and level, that looks good, I just go ahead and tighten into place, lock it in, and now that joint will dive right into the middle of the material when I plunge it through, okay? So then the next thing you want to do is now with smaller materials, it's a little easier to go with the hand, and you push up against it. You pull the trigger to let it speed up. Don't plunge it in right away. If you're pushing on this machine itself, as it's revving up, this can actually kick out because it's grabbing the material before it's sped up. So what you want to make sure safety-wise is hold down on your machine, but don't push the plunging mechanism yet. Just pull the trigger, and once it's sped up, you can go ahead and push it in, let it go all the way in, and then pull back out, okay? Then you've made your biscuit joint. That's how you do the horizontal piece, so the piece that's laying flush. Now, the trick with doing the stock that we're building here, where we have a vertical piece joining a horizontal piece, is we've got to be able to plunge into this material on the face as opposed to on the edge for the other piece, right? How do you do that? Well, you have to come in from this side and plunge it. Now you can see that's a little bit tricky. Several ways to do this. Again, with smaller material where I'm not clamping a bunch of stuff down, it's not a huge sheet that I'm using. What I tend to do is just take a scrap piece of wood, or you can even make a jig itself, okay? The fence has to come up out of the way, lock it in place, okay? Because the machine is going to be flush with the edge of the material. So I take it flush here, and then what I do is I take my piece of scrap and I push it up against the edge of that board, okay? So now it's flush against it, and same thing goes. You want to have your hand against this stock, and another way to do this is again to build a jig, or you can clamp it in place if you want, if you don't feel comfortable holding it. But you flush it up against the edge, flush the back of the machine up against the edge on all sides, okay? And the same thing, you pull the trigger, don't push down while you're starting it up because it'll kick out on you. Pull the trigger, and then go ahead and plunge it down and back up, and you've made your joint. Now, how do you determine where the joint goes? Very simple. You basically get to pick your own spot. Again, it's a machine, it's a tool that's easy to use. So this piece is going vertically, meeting this piece, okay? So what I'm gonna do is lay these two pieces together, make sure my edges are flush, this side and this side, and then I just go ahead and make my marks. And for this piece, I'm actually making 3 biscuits. So you don't want to be too far to the edge because this can actually split out and show. So you want to be far enough in where the machine's not going to burrow through and expose that edge. One here, and somewhere in here. Okay, so now those edges are marked on both pieces, and I can go ahead, I just carry those marks down. Okay, that's where I know to make the edge biscuit, and these I just carry down to this edge, and I'll show you why. There and there. Okay, so then I can see on the face where I need to make my plunge on that end. Now again, when I was showing you with that scrap material as my brace, basically my jig to hold this flush, okay, I've got my marks on this edge that'll correspond with the middle of the tool right here. I've got a line on the back of this to plunge down on. So that line lines up with my mark here on this face piece. Same thing on the guard, and some of these aren't as accurate with the guard, but you just got to kind of pay attention to that. Lock in place at 90. Same thing. I've got a mark on the actual tool itself here and on this guard itself. And again, I don't always trust these, so I like to use the actual notch in the metal piece of the tool itself as my line, but same concept. I'd have a mark here on this, I'd line it up and then plunge it in, okay? And all you're doing is holding that front piece and pushing. Again, making sure you pull the trigger before you start plunging so it doesn't kick out on you. All right, so that's a simple way to make biscuit joints with that joiner, and that's all you really need to know in order to actually start building them. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue with this, marking all my spots for my biscuits, and I'm gonna keep moving. Okay, assembly time. Woo! So, got everything laid out. I've grabbed the stock that I needed. I've made sure I labeled it ahead of time so I know everything's gonna go. The next step is going to be, as I've got my brackets laying here, is I'm gonna start gluing these panels up, set them on these biscuits, and then because of the nature of the way I'm assembling this, I'm actually gonna start setting these brackets once I set the end panels on. Normally, if I'm just using biscuit joints, I will glue up sections at a time, and then I'll actually get the big clamps out and I'll pull everything together and let it set up. But these are essentially acting as the clamp for this project. So I'm gonna start gluing things up, making sure all my labels match up, all my numbers match up panel to panel, and we'll just start putting this thing together. Screw all the brackets together and let it dry overnight, and then I should have my legs ready tomorrow. And after that, next step is going to be spray this thing, paint it. I'm gonna any repairs that need to be made because of this type of paneling, I'll do that ahead of painting, and then we'll be real close into the face finish and all that fun stuff. So we're getting there. All right, so I'm gonna start gluing these things up.
You can see the world the way it really is. Always.
Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and face this box. Since I used the sanded birch plywood, I've got these edges that are not banded. I'm not going to band them. I'm actually just going to cover them with another piece of 1/2 inch plywood. This is just sanded plywood here. So I've made a back. I've cut them already. You guys need to watch that. And then 2 sides so I can cover these edges. You can see like this. It's going to cover the back edge, so it has an actual back to it. That just helps. One, I kind of went back and forth on deciding if I wanted to open it up or not. If it's open, it looks a little more modern, but I like the back because it actually adds a little bit more support, and it's not going to be as racking as much. But it also goes ahead and kind of protects the back depending on where it's going to be placed in the house. I've cut my back piece. I've cut my 2 side pieces. Now I'm going to go ahead and glue them up and nail them on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and face the front edge with some trim, just the same way you would do with cabinet faces if you're going to do some sort of overlay. So I'm going to face all that, have everything cut, glued, nailed, and then it's ready to go for priming and painting. So. Okay, so I'm getting set to install my end panels, and right before I was put the first one on, as I picked it up, I realized it's got a slight curve in it. And I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but you can see it gets high right about here and comes back down. So it's got this much bend in it, which is actually a significant amount considering I'm really trying to put a piece of furniture together. 2 ways to go about this when you have material that's got this curve and you need to use it, because I have just very little of this stock left. I can actually take these 2 pieces and put them together so the curve is opposite of each side of it, if that makes sense. So basically, I would take the 2 pieces, set the curves away from each other, so you've got more opening in the middle. I'll try and exaggerate this, but so it's open in the middle, right? The curve is pointing that way and that way. And then what I would do is I would just clamp them together with a bunch of clamps really tight and leave it overnight, and that would be enough usually to bend it back into place. That's one way to do it. I don't want to wait. So second way to do it is to actually go ahead and install it if you can work with it enough. And I'm gonna glue up this face on this side, right, and on the other side as well. I'm gonna glue the edges, and then I'm gonna nail it in with 1-inch finish nails to pull it as tight as I can get it. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put clamps on it and pull everything against the material so the glue lets it set up, and the clamps and the glue will actually pull that material together the same way it would be if I put those 2 pieces together, clamped them up overnight, and came back. So that's what I'm gonna do actually. I'm gonna nail this, glue and nail everything up, set all my clamps on here, pull it nice and tight to pull that curve out of it, and then tomorrow when I come back in here, we should be good to go to set it into the spray area and start painting this thing up. So that's what I'm gonna do next. I'm gonna bend it back. All right, came in this morning, everything's dried up. You can see the bow is gone, so that technique works just as well as putting those 2 boards together, clamping them overnight, and getting that bow out or that twist or whatever you're trying to work on. So there's definitely different ways of dealing with that kind of scenario. Or you just get material that doesn't have a bow in the first place. But I wasn't paying attention, I was in a hurry. Lesson learned every time, never rush, would work. But here we are. We're good to go. Next step I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just go ahead and trim out the face of this, just like you would, like I said, with a cabinet. I've already got some stock that I can use from some scrap from the rest of this build so far. So I've ripped it down to the dimension that I want. I'm going to run back up into the other shop and cut this and face it all out. And then next step is going to be looking for any minor defects that we might need to patch with some wood putty, sand it down, stick it in the corner, and spray it up. So let's go cut this. All right, I cut my top and bottom pieces because I'm gonna have those go out, and then I'm gonna have the vertical pieces meet in between. I'm actually not gonna miter these. Just the way this material looks and works, I'd rather have it squared off. Again, a little bit more of a contemporary look. If I was to miter these, I'm gonna have really weird edges from those miters coming in. So I like that square butt look, and that way it keeps kind of the theme of what I'm building here, so to speak, I guess. So what I'm going to do now is there's two ways to actually measure these vertical pieces. The hardest way, and the way most people will try and do it, is they'll go ahead and try and figure out this dimension and this dimension, and then they'll measure in between. That is not the most accurate. You always want to, with finished carpentry, try and scribe as much of your measurements as possible. For instance, if this was running wild, so running long of this face, and let's say it overhang, you know, a few inches, I can take my pencil, I'll put it flush on one end. I'll take my pencil and scribe the back, okay? So then I'd have a line on the back of knowing where to cut that. It actually can be more accurate than pulling a tape edge to edge. That's something to keep in mind, because especially when you're doing your own projects and you're not as familiar with using a tape measure, reading this and getting it lined up accurately, especially with really good finished carpentry where you're trying to be accurate to a 32nd of an inch, you know, if you're happy with a 16th for most projects, it's totally fine, but you can still miss that 16th between translating the measurement, going to your miter saw, whatever you're cutting, and not accounting for a little bit of blade, and you're off a 16th, and now it's just barely inside that face, and it doesn't look quite right, and it'll drive you nuts. So the better way to do it is always to scribe as much as you can. In this instance, I'm not able to scribe in between because I don't have the best angle to get my pencil on it. So I'm actually going to nail up the top and bottom, and then I'm going to pull my tape. And then I'm going to stick a piece in there. I'm going to cut a little bit long, and I'm stick it back in, and then I can get probably a better angle on it. So just something to keep in mind when you're working with this stuff is if you can scribe your measurements, and that goes with anything. Base trim, casing, you've seen my other videos on that stuff. The less you're using this for the small measurements, the easier and better it's going to be. So just keep that in mind. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and nail these up. I'm going to glue them and nail them, and then I'm going to get my measurements for those vertical pieces, finish trimming it up, and then as that's actually drying, I'm going to look for the defects on anything that I think I need to be patched up, so we can keep moving. All right, now I'm going to measure my vertical pieces. So here's a quick tip. Something else is kind of gets people in trouble with these tape measures. This little tab on the end is made to hook, obviously, the end of a piece of material when you're measuring it, right? So what happens with this little hook when you pull on it and you hook it is it actually stretches out about a 1/16 of an inch. And the older they get, sometimes they get really flimsy. And if they start getting really flimsy, it's time for a new tape measure because your measurements are going to really be off. I'll show you why. When I hook this and I pull it down, so I'm pulling it tight to get my number to the top edge of that other piece of trim, okay? I'm at 21 and 9/16, okay? If I wasn't to put pressure on it, I just lay it on there, okay? 21 5/8. So you got to make sure when you're hooking and you're pulling measurements this direction that you're pulling your tape tight to get an accurate measurement. Same goes the other way, and less accurate way to do things, but if I were to put this inside and come down, okay, and I'm pushing on it,
I'm going to get a more accurate measurement to the top of that. So my measurement would be 19 11/16. If I don't push on it, I'm going to be off almost a 16th. Yep.
3/4. So when you're measuring, you're pulling it. Make sure you're pulling tight. When you're measuring into a corner and you have something to push it against, make sure you're pushing it tight. The tape measure doesn't want to kink up on you, but you want to have it nice and tight to get an accurate measurement. Again, just one more reason why, if you can scribe material with a nice sharp pencil, it's a way better way to do things. However, like I said, I don't really have that option because I'm in between two pieces of material. So what I end up doing is I'll leave maybe a blade on these things and I'll get it, I'll fine tune it once I bring it back and check it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a pretty good measurement here. I may play the blade a little bit, come back and see how tight it's gonna be because I want these joints as tight as possible. Everyone's gonna see it. So I'm gonna measure these two, go cut, glue and put them in. Okay, I got all my face pieces on. Somehow it didn't record me actually putting these pieces in, but we got a nice tight fit, so we're good to go. Glued and nailed. I got a little excess glue to wipe off, and then I'm gonna start with wood putty and fill these holes, doing a touch-up repair, let it set up, kind of wipe off the excess, and then I'm sticking over in the spray area. We're gonna start priming it up and getting it ready. So something with this real quick, you just wanna use a little tiny bit, okay? Get on the tip of your knife, push it in there nice and deep. Make sure you have a little bit of excess so it actually bubbles over the front, okay? That way when you wipe it off, then it doesn't actually recess into the hole itself. Same thing with caulking. Caulking. When you use spackle and you're doing trim on like base trim and you have your finish nail hole, you want to make sure you have a little bit of extra in there so when you wipe it away, it doesn't recess into the hole. Especially with like painter's caulk, it can actually shrink. That's why I don't use painter's caulk on those nail holes. I only use it on the top of the trim, which you guys have seen those other videos. But make sure you have a little bit of extra. That way when you wipe it off again, it just kind of goes away. So I'm going to get going on this and then it's ready for prime.
You can see the world the way it really is. Always.
All right, there you have it. I got all the legs secured on there. Everything's squared up, ready to go. I like the look of them overall. I think it adds a little bit of I like working with the metal and the wood. The dark finish gives it kind of that, got a little dust on there. Gets that little bit of that contemporary feel with the stainless steel. So overall, not the hardest project again in the world. So it's pretty straightforward. If you got any questions, don't hesitate to hit me up on Instagram at Shane Bailey Builder. You can DM me for any questions, comments, whatever you want. Leave them in the comment section below on this video as well. If you like this video, don't forget to hit me with that thumbs up. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you go ahead and subscribe now. That helps as well. I appreciate you guys for watching. I'm gonna get this thing cleaned up, wrapped up, thrown in the truck, and on down to Mom's house for an early Christmas present. So until next time, guys, make sure you hit that bell so you know when the next video is coming out. And yeah, I got some work ahead of me. I gotta carry this thing up the stairs. Later!
Yo, listen. Came to America, real youngster. Learned from the OGs, true gangsters. Mistakes I made never gave real answers. Then the problems came along, disaster. Had strap for what came after. Saw my brothers ghosts like Casper, plowing through my mind like a tractor. What's the reason of life? No laughter. Staying in my lane and the money came faster. Putting food on the table to platter. Anyone in my way, I is shattered. Tech was mine like a kung fu master, rebuke the demons. Josh answers, ain't no faking in me, I ain't